Wherever you are, welcome to another of my takes on China. And there is one thing we all know, and this is that if there is a confidential meeting and confidential matters are discussed, and there are a few Americans from government department heads all the way down to bag-carrying staffers in that meeting, then the confidential information will be leaked. It'll either be leaked by a senator looking to score points or maybe inform his electorate or her electorate, or by a department head afraid that his or her initiatives won't be recognized, or by a staffer who needed a down payment on a new Mustang. It might simply be a leak to gauge public opinion. That happens often. And if the public don't like it, then they'll pretend the leak was wrong and scrap the idea. It could be any one of a million different reasons, but for sure, almost nothing the US ever does confidentially remains confidential. Longer than maybe a fortnight, 2 weeks. So it was no surprise to me that a supposedly secret deal that Xi Jinping supposedly has offered to Trump through the trade negotiations in Madrid has been leaked. Or has it? We'll get into the deal in a moment. For the time being, let's look at the story behind it. Bloomberg has got a scoop. They've reported that Xi Jinping has secretly offered the US a deal whereby China invests up to $1 trillion into the US economy. Now, people are skeptical about this. Why would China do such a thing? I personally think it's a great idea. Of course China would do it. I even made a video about China offering a BRI handout to the USA and the UK and was supported by many of you, but mocked by some. It wasn't tongue-in-cheek. It follows Sun Tzu's art of war very well. Give your enemy what they think they want, and they have no need to come and take what they think they need. It's that sort of philosophy that I had in mind when I made the video a few months ago. But this is the deal real? Well, a journalist I respect enormously, Nuri Vitashi in Hong Kong, thinks it is. And a geopolitical commentator that I respect just as much, Angelo Giuliano, disagrees. So who should we believe? Maybe they're both right, maybe they're both wrong. One reason why some people think it's fake, and Angelo agrees with this, is because it's something the US does a lot of. Trump in particular will tell us often that something's been done when it hasn't. He just hopes it will be done soon. The supposed TikTok deal is a great example of that. He said the deal is done, it still isn't. Hundreds of countries lining up to kisses to get another deal, never done. Angelo also points out that there's been nothing from China to confirm this, and he's right. I've scoured Chinese media, even Chinese social media. I've looked at government sites such as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I've looked at the State Council Information Office website too. There's nothing there yet. But that doesn't mean China didn't make the deal. It simply means that China isn't talking about it because it's confidential. Trump and Xi are expected to meet in the Republic of Korea in Seoul in a few weeks, and that might be the time for announcements, if there are any announcements to be made. Now, from a US perspective, it's a great deal. If this deal goes ahead, jobs will come flooding back to the USA. Manufacturing will increase, the GDP will increase, direct foreign investment will go up, lifestyles will improve, and products manufactured will be decreased in prices. But there's a huge stumbling block. China is a national security risk. Well, it's not. But in the eyes of dozens of US senators, it is. In the eyes of US media, it is. So the US public have been told for years that it is, therefore it must be. This is a classic case of perceptions becoming reality, because for at least 12, maybe 15 years, while China has been steadily growing in wealth, in power, in manufacturing, in almost every lifestyle metric, every aspect of global hegemony except military control, it's taking over from the US. And now the lie has been repeated so many times that so many people believe it's true. China's a risk. It's not. But let's look at the deal and let's see how it will need to be sold to the US. Now, I have qualifications in change management, and I used to provide services like this to companies here in China. But this time, I'm not asking for a consultancy fee. The US can have this one on me for free, because I really do want to see this happen. Nuri Vitashi made a great post, which I've linked, so you can see all of his words. I'd love to plagiarize his work word for word, but we'll summarize it by bullet points here and let you read the details if you're interested. First, it's a huge win for Trump. He's the deal maker. He'll go down in history as a man who pulled off the biggest deal, or possibly the biggest deal in the USA since the Louisiana Purchase. It's exactly what he craves, and it might be why he's allowed the information to leak, in the hope that, even if it isn't true, the deal will actually be seen as a good thing by China, which it is. Second, China wants and needs the silliness to stop. Cars are spying on us. Same cars can be turned into weapons. The spy balloon, the port equipment knowing what America is imported, fridges reporting back to the dreaded CCP, the fridge knowing what's going on in our lives, and even garlic being deemed a security threat. These are all so ludicrous that they have to stop. If they don't, the US is going to end up as the world's largest asylum for the mentally unhealthy. Then there are tariffs. If the US is producing, the tariffs need to stop. Free trade can continue. Products manufactured in the US using parts and materials sourced from China or anywhere else are all good things, but they can't happen under tariffs. So those tariffs have to stop, or at least be drastically reduced. TikTok is part of this overall deal. China, or at least the Chinese parent company, because this has nothing to do with the country called China, will retain a share of the profitability. They will lose a lot of their US overhead costs, they will get a fair price for their product, and the US will retrain the algorithm to suit their own needs. What could be better? 180 million US users get to keep their twerking, the president gets kudos for saving it, and a bunch of elites get richer because of it. So according to this leak, China has asked for a change in policy on Taiwan. Now this needs to come from the State Department, and it needs to be supported by the Senate and Congress, but will fundamentally change nothing. Instead of the US policy being, it does not support Taiwan independence, the policy needs to be reworded to, it opposes Taiwan independence. And this will keep everything in line with what's been agreed since the end of the Second World War. No ambiguity. Other changes are more PR issues than real problems. This anti-China narrative has to stop. This is part of how it needs to be sold to the American public. New jobs, new income, new products, affordable prices, but with security guarantees. In the same way that Facebook, Google, and the rest don't operate in China, they're not banned, no Chinese platform should operate in America unless it follows American rules. It makes perfect sense. If we're honest, there are already millions of Chinese on these platforms through VPNs, and there are millions of Americans on Chinese platforms already. They do it without VPNs, and no harm has come to any of them. The US needs to tell BYD, DJI, and all of those other companies that they just need to store their data in the US. They can't have access to it without going through legal channels. And guess what? China will say, well, that's fair enough. We do the same to you. You can do that to us. No problem. In other words, they need to remove this perceived, not real threat that they have for their national security by firewalling the USA in the same way the firewall protects China. Furthermore, the US needs to say to China, open source everything that you're bringing here. Transfer the technology to us. And again, China will say, sure, yeah, we did that to you 50 years ago. You can do that to us now. And technology, perhaps not the very latest, will be transferred to the USA. Eventually, it's even possible that the USA will leapfrog again and overtake China in terms of technology. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves here. There's a long way down the track. On China's part, they need to firmly but surely observe the US removing its threats of war from their shores. They need to reduce the numbers of troops in the Republic of Korea, Japan, and Japanese colonies. They need to stop spending money for protests and riots in Xinjiang and Xinjiang. They need to get reasonable and more honest about Hong Kong. They need to get their troops out of Taiwan. And if we're honest, the savings that they make could provide enough funds back into their treasury that they can actually afford to reduce their own debt. Wouldn't that be good? If these things on both sides of the Pacific start to go ahead, we're into a new era. It's game-changing. It will keep the US at the top of the economic tree, which is what they want, but without the need for military power. They can focus on what they say they're going to focus on, and that's their own homeland security, something they openly admit they need to devote more resources to. But let's also not forget, The US has a long history of being an unreliable partner. China needs to be aware that every investment is a risk. Openness and transparency needs to be there. If we're all going to be friends again, it means we're business partners too. Let's build up some trust before this deal goes ahead. And there needs to be guardrails put in place, or should I say put back in place. Neither country should be able to hurt the other without some form of recognized arbitration and redress that they both adhere to. The World Trade Organization needs to be reinstated to a working level, and only the US can do that. Once they've done it, once they've rewritten their State Department information, once they've pulled many of their troops out of threatening positions in Asia and signed up to abide by international laws rather than their own rules-based order, then life will be a lot less complicated and many lives around the world will be greatly improved. So in my opinion, this leak could be real. I don't know if I'm right. I hope I am. If it is real, then Xi Jinping has done something that a genius has done. He's understood exactly what Trump wants. Trump wants to bring manufacturing back. He wants to claim victory. He wants the bragging rights of being the greatest dealmaker in US history. Xi Jinping, by offering this, is allowing those jobs that America claims were stolen to be replaced. And quite rightly, as he has pointed out, there are no winners in a trade war, only losers. However, if the trade war ends in this way, there'll only be winners. China doesn't care if the US think they've won. He's given them face in the Chinese sense of the word. Every person in China and much of the rest of the world will know. But who cares if the US claims victory? It was a trade war that the US started, but one which China would very definitely have finished if they do this. No one cares who claims this victory as long as the reality is a better world. That's how Xi Jinping works, that's how Sun Tzu would have advised, and it's how China and its people actually do win. They win by not fighting the war. Thanks once again for watching my take on China, and please like, share, subscribe. I'll see you next time. Bye for now.